This is great. Jim, I want to thank you for giving the first succinct, documentable dissertation on geoengineering. We haven't had this yet, and it's about time. This level of research is essential to carry what we're doing forward. Let's see, here's the clicker. Is this the clicker? Oh, by golly, it is. Cool. My name is Patrick Wood. Some of you already know me. I'm going to give you a different type of a presentation today to hopefully expand your mind. Back in 1978, I co-authored 2 books with the late Professor Anthony Sutton, Trilaterals over Washington, and we became the de facto experts on this very elite organization that was founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Anthony Sutton had just finished a stint at the Hoover Institution for War, Peace, and Revolution at Stanford University. And he was on the trail of this organization by that time in about 1975 or 6, and was starting a research project on the Trilateral Commission. He didn't realize at the time that the president of Stanford University, David Packard, was also a member of the Trilateral Commission. And that became a fatal mistake. It got him fired. They drop-kicked him out of Stanford University after a spectacular career in research and writing. He was a professor of economics at UCLA for some time before he went to Stanford. But I hooked up with Tony in about late 1977, and we began a writing stint and a publishing stint for some time, documenting the activities of this elite group. So this is my book today, Technocracy Rising, and I have several copies in the back, and if I stretch your mind a little bit and you want to argue with me or whatever, I suggest first you get my book and read it, and you will get the rest of the story. This is not a substitute for reading the book. Also, I want to mention before I get started on the back table, I also have a few copies of a DVD set called The Globalization of California, which we did 2 years ago now. It was May 2014, I believe. My ambassador at large for Technocracy News, Debbie Bacigalupi, was also on this DVD set with us. We spoke together. And it was probably the most succinct one-day conference ever given on how globalization is applied at least on a state-level basis. And I think everybody would agree that so goes California, so goes the rest of the country. They've been the thought leader and the leader of every crazy thing that's happened to us, it seems like. So I've got a few copies of that if you'd be interested in it. I want to get straight to it, though. And I want to tell you what is the globalist goal. Now, you just need to get a grip on this and get this in your head. Nobody's really quite suggested this yet, but what is the globalist goal? And mind you, I've been tracking these globalist organizations for over 40 years now. And the evidence to me is clear. This is their goal: to destroy free enterprise and capitalism and replace it with a resource-based, energy-driven economic system called sustainable development, green economy, and I say also known as technocracy. And I'll say this right up front. The people that say they've invented this stuff, usually the United Nations takes credit. They're liars, of course. They didn't create it. The whole doctrine that we see being applied today was alive and well as early as 1932. So this is nothing they invented. This is old religion, as I call it. When I say what the means to the end is, and this is one of the major points I want to make, is that global warming is a pseudoscientific religion that was created to create or facilitate this new economic system. If this system had been offered all by itself, we would have rejected it outright, right on the spot. Americans would have said, not just no, but heck no, we're not doing this. So they had to have some other reason and do some kind of an end run, if you will, around the world, citizens of the world, and around America as well. I'm not going to dwell on this, but this has become a religion. There's been 2 or 3 speakers that have talked about this. Global warming is a religion. If you're not a believer, they call you a denier. And his wife says you're being a little over the top. And then, of course, the Pope, somebody dressed up like the Pope, comes in and says, deniers repent. And we see this kind of terminology, and I'm not going to go into it. I could give you a whole hour on the similarities of the religion of global warming. Actually, several people have mentioned this already. So let me give you a proposition number 1. Should the global warming pseudoscience that we're talking about today be thoroughly discredited? I want to make it clear, absolutely yes. We need to discredit it. It deserves to be discredited because it's junk. But let me give you another proposition. Will the destruction of climate change science negate the globalist prime directive of creating a new international economic order? And I'll remind you that that was all over the literature of this group, the Trilateral Commission, back in 1973 onward. A new international economic order. We didn't quite understand really what that meant back then, new. We thought they were just going to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, sort of, and game the slot machine, for them, to pay them more, and they did that, by the way. But that was not what new meant. I did not discover this until some years later. The answer to that proposition is no. These people will not give up on their prime directive just because we destroy the doctrine of climate science. You'll see why as we go along, I hope. So I say, it didn't stop them before. The same people that are giving us this climate warming stuff today were the people who gave us climate cooling back in the 70s for the same reasons. They wanted then to create the same new economic order, and you'll remember, if those of you who were alive at the time, there was a huge energy crisis at the same time. It was basically the same MO, the same policies and stuff, and they failed. By the end of the 1970s, for sure, they were pretty much goners. At least in the early 80s, we were pretty much done with them. Now, you remember this nice lady here, Christiana Figueres. I liken her to kind of like a female Zbigniew Brzezinski in a sense. She's a very bright lady, for sure. But she was executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. She was the one that drove the Paris conference last year. She said in a press conference in February of 2015, it's a direct quote. I had to transcribe this from the video. Fortunately, she spoke English. This is the first time in the history of mankind that we're setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. And she went on to say, this is probably the most difficult task we have ever given ourselves, which is to intentionally transform the economic development model for the first time in human history. Now, you may find this statement kind of like, well, what is she talking about? Well, the United Nations uses this term, sustainable development. This is an economic term, not a political term. The United Nations, through the doctrine of sustainable development, has produced an economic system that is anathema to free enterprise and capitalism, and they fully intend to replace it from the top down with their crackpot, untested, and I might add very old philosophy or model of economic theory from the 1930s. She made no bones about it. Essentially, she has declared war on free enterprise and capitalism. David Rockefeller, who was a co-founder of the Trilateral Commission in 1973, which was created to establish the new international economic order, he said in 1994, addressing a United Nations business conference, "We're on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." Now, I'm not going to be jumping too far into conclusion here what might be the right major crises, but I'll give you a clue. Because Mr. Al Gore, for instance, who has been the primary poster child for global warming ever since the 90s, Al Gore was a member of the Trilateral Commission as well, along with Rockefeller. And what an emergency he created for us with his nonsense that the seas are going to rise and we're all going to die. Then you have the other co-founder, Zbigniew Brzezinski of the Trilateral Commission. They did this together, by the way. That wasn't just, it's kind of the beauty and the beast in a way. Brzezinski was an academic at the time, strangely enough, at Columbia University, when Rockefeller met him and they took up together. But this is what Brzezinski said in his book, Between Two Ages: the nation state as a fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state. This was the mindset that this group had in 1973. The book that set the course, Brzezinski wrote in 1970. You can get a copy of this on the internet. Somebody scanned it. It's out there. You can buy a used copy from Abe's books or whatever, probably pay a couple $100 for it, but it's out there. Get the text and look at it. His book was Between Two Ages: America's Role in the Technotronic Era. America's Role in the Technotronic Era. When Sutton and I dissected this book back in the 70s, we did not understand what the technotronic era meant. Now I do. It basically means the technocracy era, if you will, the era of scientific dictatorship, which was specified as early as 1932 by the scientists and engineers that proposed technocracy at Columbia University. The Genesis of Sustainable Development, 1987. A book was produced called Our Common Future by the so-called Brundtland Commission. This was chartered by the United Nations. It started in '83, concluded in '87. She produced this book that was later hailed as being the singular intellectual input into creating the Agenda 21 that popped out at the Rio Conference in 1992. Gru Brundtland was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Was she writing a document, a book, or editing a book for the sake of the United Nations or the nations of the world, or was she writing a book to achieve the policies of the very narrow interest of the Trilateral Commission? You need to get my book to really fill in the cracks on this, because the statistical odds of all this stuff adding up is just out of orbit. A sampling of some of the transforming programs. We've been talking about them all day. You've got Agenda 21, 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development. You've got Habitat 3 now with the new urban agenda. You've got Smart Grid. You've got Common Core Education Standards. You've got Cap and Trade. You've got Smart Growth. You've got Land Use Policies. You have Population Control. All of these policies are related to sustainable development, you understand. When the Trilateral Commission fed the doctrine of technocracy to the United Nations in 1992, they called it Agenda 21, not technocracy. They called it sustainable development, not technocracy. But that's what it is, warmed over from the 1930s. So all of these programs are related. That's my first point. They're all related. They're not just incidental things coming at us, like ICBMs from outer space, how those drop down. These are all interrelated to a master plan. Webster's defines technocracy simply as government by technicians, or management of society by technical experts. I'm not against engineers. I'm not against scientists. I know many good engineers and scientists who got their heads screwed on right. They're normal people. Some of them are here. They're not trying to take over the world. They're just like you and I. But on the other hand, there's some scientists and engineers who have other plans for the world. Technocracy with a capital T is, from the 1930s, is a replacement economic system based on energy distribution and consumption, and run by engineers, scientists, and technicians. I'm going to suggest to you there's a fifth column that's been operating in the world since the early 1930s that has had its own agenda, not a political agenda, its own agenda to do something in the world that we've never seen before, and that is convert the world into a scientifically run society. They have big heads. Technocracy was defined in 1938 pretty well by the Technocrat magazine. It was one of their official organs. They said technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. It's about the economics, not the politics. It's an economic thing here that's facing us. That's what sustainable development, green economy, et cetera, is all about. So I want to show you, I know some of you are thinking, well, technocracy, schmocracy, what the heck are we talking about? And somewhere, this is probably about 1942. This caravan actually started out, technocracy caravan started out in Phoenix, Arizona, right here on Indian School Road. They drove up in caravan style to Golden Gate Park and held a huge rally up there to get people on board with technocracy. This is a huge movement. Back in those days, you could go into any car dealer, any brand of car, and ask for a car. You say, I'm a technocrat. Here's my technocrat card or whatever. It's a membership organization, and I want to buy a car in technocracy gray. They say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. They give them the money. And before you know it, your car would show up looking just like this. That's called technocracy gray. And the hubcaps with kind of the orange tint to it, the hubcaps were part of the motif. And you can see the sign on the side of the car with a little monad symbol. That was their corporate logo. And you can see it says technocracy. You'd get a car just like this. Didn't matter which car dealer you went into. Well, here you have dozens and dozens and dozens of these cars, and here they are on the road, making their way up to Golden Gate Park in California. They're already in California at this point. There's nothing in Arizona that looks like that. But they're making their way up there, and you can see they got a little teardrop trailer over there, and you can see the megaphones on the top of their cars. They would go around to all the neighborhoods and say, come to the technocracy meeting. We're having it such and such a place or whatever. They'd go all over town and announce the technocracy meeting. I'll tell you what, thank God America rejected technocracy, mostly before, especially by the middle of the 1940s, or we would all be in a lot of trouble. You see why. Here's the Hollywood Bowl. But Hollywood Bowl is no small venue, right? You can see here it's packed, absolutely packed full of people to come and hear about technocracy from the leader of technocracy, Howard Scott, the co-leader on the left there. And you can see them all standing up in line there on the stage and stuff. You'll notice they all have technocracy gray suits and dresses and whatever, like uniforms on. That was not a mistake. It had a distinctly paramilitary look. Americans didn't like that because it seemed to look a lot like something going on in Germany at that time, where there were some unsavory characters running around essentially the same uniforms. And that scared a lot of people. Some highlights of technocracy. By nature, it produces volumes of inviolable regulations that are science-based. It creates totalitarian control in the end, but I'm going to really stress this as we go along. It is not socialism or communism. It's a different animal. It seeks to replace the price-based economic system with an energy-based system. Now, you and I grew up with money. We understand money. We have bank accounts. We live it. We breathe it, whatever. These people wanted to throw that entire model out the window and create a system of energy credits, they called it, where everybody would receive what might be exchangeable, some kind of exchangeable something called energy credits. Everybody in society would simply get their allocation, and you could go out and spend it on things according to the energy it took to make the goods that you were going to buy. I'm going to tell you now, from 1934, from the Technocracy Study Course, which is their Bible, the 5 main requirements of technocracy. This will tend to blow your mind because you might think it could have been written yesterday. But the first requirement, and engineers are good at that, right? You give an engineer a project, man, he gets out his pad and starts making a list of requirements and stuff and diagramming and sketching, how we get from here to here and whatever. Well, these guys knew what they were doing, so they wrote down a bunch of requirements, actually only 7. I'm going to give you the first 5. The first requirement for them was register on a continuous 24-hour-day basis the total net conversion of energy. That means that's talking about usage of energy. Number 2, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. Have you heard this terminology recently anywhere along the way? Have any of you listened to some, or read some of your utility literature that comes out? They're trying to create a balanced load, and what they have to do to get that is to put a digital meter on the side of your home that will communicate with the home office via Wi-Fi or some other scheme, all of the energy consumption and stuff going on in your home. What appliances are being used and to what extent, what's your energy signature, if you will. So the definition for smart grid was established before the technology was available to do it. I won't go into how this got started completely, but it was in 2009. You won't find anything relating to smart grid in particular before the year 2009. And most of the money that went into it was stimulus money by executive order. There was no public demand for it whatsoever. Number 3 requirement, provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption. Number 4, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services where produced and where used. And number 5, which goes along with it, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual plus a record and description of the individual. Now, if it hasn't hit you already, just think about the surveillance that's going on in America today. Think about the CIA, the NSA, the DHS, and every other, one of the other 17 intelligence agencies collecting data. We are being vacuumed to death. Anybody think Common Core is about education? I'll tell you, it's about the data. 400 points of data collected on every student from the time they get into school until they matriculate. That stays with them permanently now. Anybody think Obamacare is about health care? Do they care that you get healthy and well? It's about the data. They're collecting reams of data every time somebody fills out a form for Obamacare. It will stay with you forever. Now, just as adding a little salt to the stew here, this is the organization chart that the technocracy group drew up in the 30s. This has been typed in and stuff anew, but it was all hand-drawn originally. This is their chart, their organization chart of North America. They specified a continental director, a continental board that would elect the continental director. They had various special sequences like armed forces and so on to be run by other technocrats, science and engineers. Remember, this is the science of social engineering. And then they had all these area boards set up and service functions and industrial functions and whatever. Boy, they had their ducks lined up in a row on how to manage society. You'll notice there's one thing missing from this, and this is the off-the-rails crackpot ideology of this 5th column of actors in the world today. There is no public representation whatsoever. There's no Congress. Some technocrats, in fact, one technocrat wrote a book, and I think it was 1934, and suggested to FDR that when he got elected, he declare himself dictator in order to implement technocracy. We can be thankful we only got the New Deal instead of technocracy, but they wanted Roosevelt to simply dismiss Congress and turn over control of all the national operation to these scientists and engineers. Big heads, huh? Incredible. You heard of these 2 books, well, one book at least. 1932, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. How many read that? Anybody read it? Go get a used book and read it again. If you got it on a bookshelf, go read it again. Huxley was a Brit, of course. He wrote this book in 1932, in the same year that Columbia University housed the technocracy movement in the bottom of Hamilton Hall, in the basement. The head of Columbia University was a globetrotter at the time. He spent more time in Europe than he did in the United States, I think, for some years. And Huxley got wind of technocracy, and he wrote this book. This is the primary, I believe, is the primary intellectual fodder, if you will, for his book. He concluded scientific dictatorship was what's on the plate. Now, everybody talks about this. Oh, it's a brave new world. You know, something happens today. Oh, it's a brave new world. They don't have any idea what they're talking about. You go back and read the book, you'll find out what he thought, and he was no good guy, by the way, but what he concluded that would end up with would be a scientific dictatorship, and it was a very scary book. Let me give you a quick lexicon. Talk about resource grab, because sustainable development is about grabbing resources from the private citizens and the countries and the states of the world. They want to capture the resources because they say, in a resource-based economy, the people are too selfish, stupid, and ignorant to handle stuff by themselves. They need somebody else to do it. So they're using that as an excuse to get all the resources into their pile. If you're on the big monopoly board, they're trying to get the whole thing into their pocket. Obama invoked the 1906 Antiquities Act to grab 265 million acres during his tenure. Can you imagine 265 million acres? It gets worse. You look at the breakdown. You got BLM now has 247 million, Fish and Game 89 million, Forest Service 197 million, National Park Service 84 million, Wilderness Areas 109 million, Wetlands another 110 million acres, totaling up, and I realize there's some overlap here, but totaling up 636 million acres in America. That represents potentially 36% of the entire national landmass of our country, including Alaska. Something wrong with this picture, folks. We have been grabbed right under our nose, and they're not giving it back. Well, we might like to have them give it, but we hope they're going to give some of it back, but they haven't yet. There's been a resource grab with water. The Clean Water Restoration Act from 2010 was absolutely draconian. I'm not going to read this, but they got control, the federal government got control of every drop of water on the face of our country. Now, they haven't asserted authority yet on all of it, but they're going to, and it's been a progression along the way. Can you imagine, though, sloughs, prairie potholes, wet meadows, playa lakes, natural ponds, all tributaries and so on? Playa lakes, by the way, are dry lake beds. Dry lake beds. They want that too. Not just satisfied with a little drop of water. And of course, you've already seen the simulated reserve and corridor system to protect biodiversity, which will take almost 97% of all of the territory in America and put it off limits to human, or put it under such severe restrictions that you won't be able to do anything on the rest of it. If you can find the light blue or green areas on there, you'll find out where there's normal development taking place. Sustainable development, as defined in 1987 by Gru Brundtland, was that it is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This has never been said before like this. Everybody's concerned about their kids and grandkids to a great degree, but nobody's said it like this. But what this means, how this translates out by a member of the Trilateral Commission, I might add, is you need to give us control, in other words, stewardship, over the resources of the world, so that stewardship will be there for your children and grandchildren. Oh, we need to give it to you, do we? Okay, we mean we can't just get it and leave it to them in our will or something like that? No, they want you to give them the resources, and they will make sure that now if you believe that, honestly, you're something wrong with you. That you can trust them, oh wow, when I'm dead and gone, you know, they're going to take care of my kids and grandkids. No, they're not. They're looking to get it into their own pocket, and they always have from day one when they started to create the new international economic order. But this is where it's going. The green economy, you'll see this term now. This is the official definition from UNEP. I'm just going to read the first sentence. The green economy implies the decoupling of resource use and environmental impacts from economic growth. Talk about pseudoscience. This is nuts. You can't divorce economic growth from the use of resources. Economic growth is resources, right? Well, I tell you what, these people that come up with this stuff, they're absolutely off the rails. They're saying stuff that people, oh, that sounds not mystical, but that sounds really profound. And they just somehow, they just give it a free pass. Like, well, I guess they got a PhD. They must know what they're talking about. You know, This is nuts. As an economist, I've never heard such crazy statement like this, but they believe this stuff. This is the economic system that Figueres talks about they're going to replace for capitalism and free enterprise. Now, you've all heard this guy already. I won't go into it again, but he's let the cat out of the bag back then. I don't know if that got him fired or not. Probably should have. But he said it like it was. Not about climate policy at all. Some other program. Smart grid. This is what they said in 1934 in the technocracy study course. There's large numbers of different bookkeeping devices whereby the distribution records and the rate of consumption of the entire population can be kept. In a technological administration, in other words, technocracy, energy accounting is the only efficient method. Why do you think we have the focus on energy today with all, whether it be smart grid, whether it be international, global smart grid, or whether it be cap and trade projects, et cetera, carbon credits, and so on? This is the reason, this is the genesis why. In a technological society, the only logical way to do it is with energy accounting. Education, we talked about Common Core, bad stuff. But listen, it didn't just start there. It's been going on for a long time, as you know. But back in 1934, in the technocracy study course, this is what they specified. An educational system to train the entire younger generation indiscriminately as regards all considerations other than inherent ability, hyphen, it's their hyphen, a continental system of human conditioning. That's what they said. Now, is it any surprise today that people liken Common Core to a system of human conditioning? Well, yeah, that's because what it is. That's what was specified for a technocracy, that kind of education. Now, here's a guy, I'm going to say I love this guy. He's a guy I kind of love to hate. His name is Peter Sutherland. He's from Europe. He's currently the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General for International Migration. And this guy is a member of the Trilateral Commission as well. He's been running around Europe for years, talking them into immigration quotas before the invasion even started. And he's on record saying stuff like this: no other force, not trade, no capital flows, has the potential to transform lives in sustainable, positive ways and on the scale that migration does. Okay, so is he talking for the United Nations alone, or is he talking perhaps of the policies of the Trilateral Commission to create a new international economic order? You've got to read my book to find that out, by the way. But this man has been running around for years telling this, and I'll tell you what, if you wonder why our border is open on the southern border right now, it's because of guys like this in the Trilateral Commission that are pushing these policies. They want open borders. They want to remove the borders in the world altogether. There you go. Total Information Awareness. This is the actual logo of the DARPA Center for Information Awareness Office. This is their actual logo. You see it on the wall there in their office. It's incredible. You'll see the all-seeing eyes looking over the globe there. You'll see the phrase below it. It says, Scientia est potentia. Knowledge is power. Yeah, okay, that's what we're dealing with here. It's not about national security, not at all. It's about monitoring society down to the gnat's whisker. Here we have the total surveillance society as I represent it, with the Director of National Intelligence in the middle, who is in control, by the way, in charge of all the 17 agencies in our nation. Given control in 2005, but here's some of the four big ones. FBI, CIA, and so on. And how this came to be, the DNI, where did DNI come from? There was no DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, before 2005. But it came about when it was created by George Bush on April 21, 2005. And it was ostensibly to kind of coordinate everything and bring the agencies together so that they don't have a lot of confusion and stuff. That was a ruse. Looking backwards, it was an absolute ruse to do it. Because who would you pick to completely reorganize the intelligence community of our country to end up with what we have today, with a runaway rogue intelligence system that is bent on gathering information on every cotton-picking American that lives in this country? Who would be the person to reorganize intelligence other than a person that Bush appointed, namely John Negroponte, the first director of national intelligence, a member of the Trilateral Commission. Yeah. You know, you can't add up the statistics on this and come out with anything less than about 1,000 zeros, 10 to the, you know, whatever, 10 and then 1,000 zeros after it. This is incredible. These people show up everywhere, and every time I see them show up like this, and you notice that I love to name names. I've been naming names all the time. You can go to technocracy.news and you'll see a lot more names and stuff. John Negroponte was given a 2-year window to completely reorganize the intelligence system in our country, and he did. And now they want nothing to do with Congress. Congress has slapped them repeatedly. The courts have slapped them repeatedly. They say, oh, we won't do it anymore. 6 months later, what happens? Another thing, you know, something else is really, oh my gosh, they're doing it again. Oh, we're still doing it, are we? You know, it's like, well, they just keep doing it. They're run away. We need to escape this matrix. Technocrats are so totally unplugged from reality, they're bent on destroying the earth, not saving it. I'll just say it right out. They say they're going to save the earth. They're not going to save the earth. They've declared essentially a war on humanity. They're going to destroy us if we don't stop them first. It's old religion, but simply implemented anew as the green economy or sustainable development. These people should be ashamed for plagiarizing the works of early technocrats, even though I don't like them. They should be ashamed for plagiarizing the work and not just saying what's true about, yeah, we got this from this other architecture. And I might add, by the way, there's never been another economic system in history that's been defined as an alternative to capitalism and free enterprise. Never. This is the first one. It's the sponsor of all the programs like Agenda 21, 2030 Agenda, et cetera, Wildlands Project, all of it. The whole kit and caboodle. And the end result of it's going to be scientific dictatorship a la Brave New World. We want to look at this book now just briefly. This is Huxley's follow-up book, almost 25 years later, 1958, Brave New World Revisited, he called it. You want to go back, take a look and see, well, how's the progress going? He wrote this: the older dictators fell because they could never supply their subjects with enough bread, enough circuses, enough miracles, enough mysteries. Under a scientific dictatorship, education will really work, with the result that men and women will grow up to love their servitude and will never dream of revolution. There seems to be no good reason why a thoroughly scientific dictatorship should ever be overthrown. I take that as a challenge. How about you? I say, let's overthrow it. Okay, go to the web someday and look up theelders.org. This is an amazing site. They've created this concept of the global village, and they have appointed themselves as global elders. And they simply call themselves the elders. This is very egocentric, very egomaniac. But they've got a lot of followers, and they've got a lot of people around the world. You see why, and you look at the membership list. You see these people like Nelson Mandela, Kofi Annan, Gru Brundtland down there. You'll see, Jimmy Carter. Yay, there's Jimmy Carter up there. Mary Robinson from Ireland. Ernesto Zedillo, the former president of Mexico. This is quite a group of elders, I have to say. But I want you to listen to them. If we can get this to play, it'd be very cool.
Some of us have been in charge of countries.
Or Secretary General of the United Nations.
We have all witnessed history on the front lines.
Where there's war and abject poverty.
But also hope. We don't just believe change is possible, we know.
We are the elders.
We work for peace and human rights.
We believe a just and equitable world is possible.
We do not despair.
We never give up.
And neither should you.
Join us and work towards a better world.
these people are off the rails, folks. This is the fifth column, this after supremacy and the world today, and they're dead serious. This same group of people, the mindset of people, they marched behind the likes of Adolf Hitler in Germany, in Nazi Germany. They marched behind the likes of fascism in Italy. They've marched beside this throughout our history in America, at least since 1930s and so on, just quietly going along their way, doing their thing. But these technocrats represent a clear and present danger to our nation, and they need to be flat out stopped. To recap, global warming was fabricated as a means to drive the new international economic order. I just want you to see, that's one of the main things I want you to see. We need to just collapse the whole climate change issue, but that's only the means to an end. We need to focus on the end. And I think any good military strategist would tell you, you need to stay one step ahead of the enemy and always recognize what the enemy's objective is. The enemy's objective is not just merely global warming. That's just a ruse to force people into the solution of this new economic system, which is sustainable development, green economy, or technocracy. The United Nations has declared war on free enterprise and capitalism. I want you to see that too. Do you realize what happened to us if we lose our economic system? Do you realize that not one of us would be able to afford to come to a conference like this? We'd be done. We'd be out of it. We'd be out of it. Every one of us has some economic benefit from society. Either we run a business, we have a job, we got retirement, whatever, we worked along the way. Without our economic system, America can't be made great again. It's what made America great in the first place. Political system had a lot to do with it. It's very compatible. But if we lose our economic system, it's curtains. These technocrats want us to lose our economic system altogether, and they want to take it over. The war will continue with or without global warming. And the proof of that is they tried it in the 1970s, and they failed, and they came back again with a different mantra. They said, oh, now we're going to do global warming instead of global cooling. But it's the same old mantra. If we conquer any part of this hydra-headed monster without getting the head of it, the jugular vein, they're going to keep coming back at us until the cows come home. That's a ranching term, I guess, right? Until the cows come home. I hope the cows come home soon. But these people are not going to give up. They're hardcore people with an ideology embedded in governments around the world, embedded in the United Nations, I might add, embedded in agencies and stuff in our country like the EPA and the Department of Energy and DARPA and military intelligence and intelligence community and stuff. These people are hardcore, and they're all unelected by and large. They're unelected and they're unaccountable. They're the ones that's driving this agenda. It's not our elected politicians at all. It's these other people that are behind the scenes. We need to find out who these rats are and get them purged from our government. We must continue to fight until technocracy is ultimately defeated and totally rejected. In my mind, as I have studied this for a long, long time, there is no other substitute for total victory. Now, I have worked for 40 plus years fighting different things, fighting communism, socialism, fascism, you name it. Some of you have too. I look back over my life and I've seen the countless hours people have put into battles like this. And I only ask the question, why the heck haven't we been more successful? Why are we having a conference like this? Why do we have to have a conference like this? What did we do for 40 years, for Pete's sake? And I know Ed has been after this longer than me. Why haven't we been more successful? Well, I'll tell you, my opinion is we have not identified clearly the real enemy. We haven't gone after the real enemy of this, and he keeps coming back at us. Even when we have minor victories, we find next year, 6 months, whatever, all of a sudden, boom, in it comes again. Something else pops up. Why did that come up? We didn't get the monster, if you will. I will suggest, and as you read my book, Technocracy Rising, I will suggest that the real enemy is technocracy and the technocrats that are running it. And yes, our political system is involved. Most of our politicians don't realize that if these technocrats ever get the power that they want, they will all be out of a job. Every single one, because they intend to fire them. They don't need politicians. Back in the 1930s, they called politicians blithering idiots. Well, some of you would agree with that today. But they did. They called them idiots. They said, they're the problem. They're the reason we're in this fix that we're in, and we need to get rid of all those politicians because they're stupid, they're ignorant, they don't understand the technology that they're trying to operate and govern with, and they need to let us just take over and do it. And if you think about some of the dictators in history about living under their life, you ain't seen nothing yet if technocracy gets a hold of us, because these technocrats are merciless, and we will rue the day. Last thing I want to say, just to kind of clear up the issue of Marxism and communism and stuff vis-a-vis technocracy, or technocracy in general. Zbigniew Brzezinski has been often tagged as a Marxist or a communist. He is not. I'll just say this. I don't like the guy. I'll say he's not. He said in Between Two Ages, his book, if you get the book, you can read it, he declared that Marxism represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. That's what he said. It wasn't the end. It was merely a stepping stone to what he considered the maturing of man's universal vision, which was the technotronic era. Get the book and read it, folks. He laid it right out. They're using Marxism, socialism, communism, they're using that as a tool to break society down in order to implement technocracy. You'll have to read it to understand it. Anyway, I'll get off the stage because somebody else is coming right up behind me, and if you have questions, we'll meet over at the table. Thank you.